Hello and welcome to another Magic 2015 gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a very exciting deck, and that's a 5-color domain deck that's trying to use all those domain cards that you might have seen in the card pool but that nobody really uses. So now we're trying to use those domain cards, which makes for a very interesting deck building challenge, because domain means all the effects become more powerful the more different basic land types we control. So that means we can't play any non-basic lands in this deck. We can only play with the basic lands, so no gates, no tri-lands, which makes the mana base very difficult to make work. So we have to rely on cards like Cultivate and cards like Traveler's Amulet to fix our mana, because they both fetch for basic lands. So the main color of the deck is green for the mana fixing of Cultivate and for cards like Wild Nacatl. And our secondary color is red for some cheap removal cards and burn spells. And I guess our third color would be black. And then we're only having a light splash of blue and white for these two cards, and of course to activate the domain, so we have the most powerful effects possible. So let's take a look at the deck, starting with a Drag Down, a 3-mana removal spell, giving -1/-1 for each basic land type we control. So if we get up to domain, this can even kill a Baneslayer Angel for 3 mana at instant speed, which is very powerful. Then we've got Shock for some early action to interact with the opponent, can also go to the face and be used like that, because we are having a lot of 3-drops in this deck. Turn 2 we will likely use to play and activate the Traveler's Amulet, but still we need some early interaction before turn 3, so that's where Shock comes in. If we do have the red mana available, that is, which can be a problem. Then we have Wandering Goblins, which is arguably one of the more powerful domain cards, and it might not look like it when first reading the card, but the important part about this card is that you can actually use the Goblin's ability more than once every turn. So let's say you have 6 mana out, you have the domain fully active. For 6 mana you can give this guy +10 power out of nowhere basically, because most opponents won't read this card properly. So you can sneak in 10 damage if this guy goes unblocked, which is a very powerful effect. And yeah, he doesn't attack very well early on, because spending 3 mana just to pump him up might not be great. But in the late game this can certainly kill an opponent. Then we've got a Resounding Thunder as another burn spell, removal spell. And because we are ramping quite a bit, getting up to 8 mana is actually feasible, so cycling this to deal the 6 damage instead of 3 and also drawing a card with the cycling is certainly achievable. Then we've got a Wild Nacatl, a 1-mana 1/1 that gets +1/+1 if we control a mountain and +1/+1 if we control a plains. Our main color is green. Red should be pretty easy to get because we have a bit more red than the other colors. And then the plains is the only land we will really have to search for. So Wild Nacatl is usually a 2/2 at the start, and then around turn 3-4 this can be a 3/3. So still pretty powerful, some early action again to get us up to the later part of the game, where we can cast cards like Matca Rioters, which is probably the most efficient domain card, a 3-mana star where the power and toughness is equal to the number of basic land types we control. So this can just be a 3-mana 5/5 later in the game, which is obviously pretty efficient. Then we've got Cultivate, which is probably the most important card in the deck. If you have a green source and 2 more lands and a Cultivate in your opener, then it's gonna be pretty easy to get to the domain. So we have all 5 basic land types out. Then we've got Spore Burst, another nice domain card that makes a 1/1 token for each basic land type we control. So if domain's fully active, we get 5 tokens for just 4 mana, which is very powerful as it can buy us some time, provide some chump blockers while we can attack with our bigger creatures. And then we've got Traveler's Amulet as an additional mana fixer. It's not a great card obviously, but it is required to get to our domain, 1 mana to play, 1 mana to activate, and we get to grab any basic land we want. So usually this is a turn 1, turn 2 play, where on turn 2 you could cast this and activate this in the same turn, if you do have the second land, that is. So pretty good in this deck. Another option I considered but eventually did not end up playing was the Armillary Sphere, just because it's 2 mana to play and 2 mana to activate, which is a little too slow. If you look at our curve, that means playing it on 2 and then activating it on turn 3, where we already have all these 3 drops. So that doesn't really work out, and it also leads to flooding quite a bit, because you'll end up with way too many lands. So it's probably not worth playing the Sphere. And then we've got a Maelstrom Archangel, which is our only 5-color card in this deck, despite us being a 5-color deck. But this one's certainly worth it, a 5 mana 5/5, which can fly, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we get to cast any card from our hand without paying its mana cost. So not only creatures, we can even cast something like a Spore Burst off of it, and then still have mana left to do other things, which is why this card is so powerful. Then I've also added the Rafiq of the Many, another powerful multicolor card, which works very nicely with cards like Matca Rioters once you've got a few basic land types out, because with the Exalted and the Double Strike he can deal massive amounts of damage. So that's Rafiq. And then finally Ground Assault as another powerful removal spell. Since red and green are our 2 main colors, it's gonna be pretty easy to cast this early on, and later in the game this can kill just about anything. So that's Ground Assault. Now let's take a look at our lands. We are only playing 20 of them, but we do have the 4 amulets that you could count as lands, I guess, and then 4 cultivates. We want a nice density of forests in order to be able to cast cards like Cultivate, because if we can't cast a Cultivate, then we're not getting anywhere. So 9 forests for that, then 6 mountains to support all our burn spells, then 3 swamps for the drag down mainly, and then just 1 island and just 1 plains. So those are the 2 that we will most likely be fetching with cards like Cultivate and Traveler's Amulet once we've got the other ones already. So that's the deck. Now let's play some games. Alright, let's take a look at our opening hand, which has a forest, a plains, 2 amulets and a cultivate. So if we don't draw any additional lands, then this hand is great. If we do draw a bunch of lands, then this can flood out quite easily, but I think I'll keep it and hope for the best. And let's lead with forest into amulet and pause the turn. Likely just gonna get a mountain next turn and then play the second amulet, and then turn 3 cast a cultivate, getting the remaining 2 basic lands. So all we need to do now is draw into some sweet domain cards. Opponent leads with Trained Caracal, 1/1 lifelink, and there's one of our sweet domain cards already. Now I could consider grabbing a mountain with the amulet and leaving up shock in case our opponent is playing some sort of aura deck, and I think I'll do that since we do have our 3rd land already for cultivate. So let's grab a mountain and keep up shock. This deck not very easy to play because you do have to make a lot of decisions about what lands you want to get, and it can come back to bite you if you make the wrong decision. So let's see if the opponent goes for it. Yep, there's a Nimbus Wings and there's a shock, getting us a nice 2-for-1 and setting up our cultivate. So leaving up shock there was definitely worth it. So let's play our cultivate here. Actually, I could also see us just casting the rioters and next turn cultivating, which will then basically be a pump spell for the rioters. Yeah, I don't actually hate that. So play the rioters here. Opponent can read it, probably hasn't seen it before. And then next turn we get to cast Cultivate and attack with a 5/5, as well as play out the Amulet, which will likely get a second red source. I'm not sure. So does the opponent have a play here? No play, so could have a reprisal, which is actually interesting. So if we put our opponent on reprisal, then attacking before playing the Cultivate makes sense. Because if we Cultivate first, then this will become a 5/5, which will die to the reprisal. Problem is with that line of thinking that yeah, this will die eventually to the reprisal, and I think getting 5 damage in is more relevant than getting 3 damage in, because we are hitting in chunks of 5 with Domain, but we do have a Resounding Thunder, which adds up to 6 with the 3 damage, so I'm not sure here. I think I'm just gonna go for it, just because having a 5/5 on turn 4 seems too ridiculous to pass up on. So let's go ahead and attack and see if we get punished. And it looks like we did not, so 5 damage in, play the Amulet and pass the turn. And let's see if the opponent manages to find another creature, or if Trained Caracal was all our opponent had. 4 mana and no play. Opponent could have Divine Verdict as a removal spell, which can destroy an attacking creature, but I guess that's fine. So let's go ahead and attack. And then play out 2 of our goblins. I guess we can only play 1. Alright, our opponent did have a reprisal after all. So I guess our writer's down. So here, let's see. We can play the activate the Amulet, grab a mountain, and then play 2 of our goblins. No, that doesn't work. We're short 1 mana then. So we can only play 1 Wandering Goblins no matter what. So I guess I still want to get a second red. So let's do that anyways. So let's play a mountain, play Wandering Goblins, and pass a turn. So next turn we could be attacking for 10 damage if our opponent doesn't have another removal spell, or if he can't make any blockers. So opponent on 5 cards in hand. I guess Baneslayer Angel would be sort of a pain here, since we don't have any drag downs or ground assaults, but our opponent passes a turn. So now we're faced with another interesting decision, as our opponent could easily have another reprisal. I think we only want to pump the Wandering Goblins once, play the Wild Nacatl, and then also play the second Wandering Goblin, since I don't think our opponent has Planar Cleansing we have to play around. Also, we're getting close to be able to cycle Resounding Thunder, need 1 more land, so that's also something worth thinking about. But let's start by attacking with the Wandering Goblins here, see what happens. So let's see if the opponent has any effects. He does not. So let's activate this one, leaving up green and red. So now we've got a 5-power goblin, which does hit. So now we can play Wild Nacatl and play Wandering Goblins. So second Wandering Goblins, So now if our opponent does have Baneslayer Angel, we could Resounding Thunder our own creature to prevent a life gain, but then we still only get to pump one of the goblins, so that wouldn't really work. Another Rioters is of course great. So let's attack with everyone. And let's pump one of each. I guess we could also keep up Resounding Thunder, but this seems better. So if the opponent doesn't have anything, then this is game. Alright, so it looks like the opponent was relying on a lot of auras there and didn't have any creatures to put them on, or perhaps just flooded out. But we did get to show the power of Domain if you do hit all your land drops early on, and Cultivate certainly helped. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opening hand. And this one we unfortunately can't keep. Only one land and no green source for Cultivate. No fixing early on, so let's try another one. Alright, this one's acceptable. We have Amulet and Cultivate, which pretty much solves all our problems. Let's go ahead and play the Amulet here. Next turn we get to keep up Shock and activate the Amulet. And then turn 3 we'll get to play Cultivate if we don't draw anything else. Opponent leads off with a Mountain. We draw another Mountain, which is not great, but given that we do have Cultivate and Amulet, we will be able to hit Domain regardless. Only problem here is that we'll end up flooding out a bit maybe. But let's go ahead and activate the Amulet, get a Swamp. Could also see getting a Plains for Wild Nacatl, but we don't have it in hand yet, so I'd rather get the Swamp for drag downs we might cast next turn if we draw it. So now we get to keep up Shock. Hopefully our opponent plays something we can shock. Krenko's command would not really qualify as it makes 2 1/1 tokens. But looks like our opponent doesn't have anything. Another Mountain is not great, so we're really starting to flood out even though we're only playing 20 lands. So let's go ahead and Cultivate, get the remaining 2 basic land types. And I guess hope our opponent is not playing a land destruction. So yeah, I guess land destruction would be this deck's worst matchup. If they destroy your 1 plains and 1 island. Rebel Master, alright. So it does get the 1/1 token here. But we'll be able to clean up the Rebel Master with a Shock. Ground Assault is also interesting. But I think I want to keep that one for bigger creatures. And just in case our opponent goes Plains and has a God's Willing in hand, I think I'll shock the Rebel Master right now. And here, given that we have the island in hand and no domain card yet, I think I'm okay with playing the Mountain to keep up a Resounding Thunder and pass a turn like that, just in case our opponent has maybe another Rebel Master we want to kill right away. Although it would be nice to cycle the Resounding Thunder. I'm not gonna kill the Gutter Snipe right away with the Resounding Thunder, I think. Given that we don't have any other action. Yeah, another land is not great. So let's see, we've got 6 lands in play. In 2 turns we can cycle this. So maybe I just Ground Assault the Gutter Snipe. We do get punished if our opponent plays Stormbreath Dragon next turn. Other than that, I can't think of any other big creatures our opponent could play that Resounding Thunder doesn't kill. Inferno Titan on 6, but then we'll be able to cycle this. So I think I'll go ahead and Ground Assault the Gutter Snipe to save some damage and hope to draw some creatures soon. Most of our opponent's burn spells won't be able to really handle our big creatures. Opponent plays Kiln Fiend and Gutter Snipe, which is interesting. I think I still hold on to this Resounding Thunder. Another Resounding Thunder, I guess, changes things. So let's see what's gonna happen next turn. Our opponent maybe shocks our face, triggers the Gutter Snipe, pumping the Kiln Fiend. So what's better, killing the Gutter Snipe or killing the Kiln Fiend? I guess killing the Gutter Snipe saves 4 damage. Kiln Fiend also deals 4. If the opponent plays 2 spells, then killing the Kiln Fiend's better. But we do have to kill the Gutter Snipe right now if we want to prevent any triggers. So I think I'll do that. Just kill 1. And then hopefully our opponent doesn't go for the pump on the Kiln Fiend, so we can cycle the Resounding Thunder next turn to get an extra card out of it. But if our opponent does go crazy, then we do have an answer. Hall of Triumph is fine, as we can still kill the Kiln Fiend. But if our opponent follows it up with another instant, then we might have to kill it. So hits us for 4, which is still a lot, but not infinite. Alright, there's a drag down, which is also nice. So let's go ahead and play Forest, pause a turn, planning to cycle the Resounding Thunder on the Kiln Fiend. But we do have another removal spell at the ready. And I think our opponent is playing a more aggressive deck that we don't have to plan on playing around an Inferno Titan here. I don't think our opponent will have that in this deck, although I could be wrong. But I think I want to draw the extra card here, because we do need to find a creature at some point. So drawing the extra card here I think outweighs the chance of our opponent having an Inferno Titan that we can't kill with drag down. Instead we drew basically 2 more lands, so that's not great. Let's go ahead and play the Amulet and activate it to get 1 more land out of our library. I guess we tap the green just to represent more cards. So as you can see, we don't have a ton of lands left in our deck. Let's get the Swamp and play it. And pause a turn. At some point I also had Obelisk of Alara in the deck, but then the mana base didn't really work out most of the time, so I replaced them with more lands, which might be punishing us now a bit. Let's go ahead and kill the Foundry Street Denizen to prevent some damage, and hope our opponent doesn't follow this up with a big scary creature. Doesn't look like it. And there's a Spore Burst, which is pretty decent, I would say. So let's go ahead and play it. I guess tap more of our colors. This is fine. And make 5 tokens. And I guess we play out our land in case we need more goblin activation mana. So here the question is, do we double block the token Our opponent could have a shock to take out one of the tokens, which would make a block bad, unless we block with more creatures. Now if the opponent has something like a coordinated assault, which gives the goblin first strike, then blocking with multiple tokens is bad. But if our opponent is just gonna go for an all-out attack, then I guess 2 double blocks make sense here. So yeah, if our opponent has coordinated assault, we are pretty screwed. But we can't really play around it. The only way we play around it here is by single blocking and leaving back 2 1/1s. But I don't think that makes a ton of sense. So let's go ahead and block these, killing the Bushwhacker and the Shortcutter if these blocks happen, and hope our opponent doesn't have a trick. Alright, he did not. Still has a 3-2 in play, which will be a 2-2 next turn against our 1-1. And a Bolt of Keranos will be pointed at our face, so we're forced to jump next turn, although I guess we could still take a hit. Opponent's crying here, maybe looking for another burn spell. I don't think we get to know if our opponent keeps it on top or on the bottom. And there's finally a creature we can play. So let's go ahead and play it. And now I think keeping the land in hand is fine. Let's see, do we attack with our 1-1? If our opponent has another Goblin Bushwhacker, then I think we want to keep our 1-1 back. Yeah, we do need to hit a second creature in order to be able to attack safely, because we are dead to another Bushwhacker otherwise. There's a Paragon, which is also pretty good here. Can give something haste. Another Spore Burst will, however, give us a nice ground cushion. Attacking with the Rioters is not great now because our opponent can double block, and I don't want to trade our 5-5 with a 3-3, so we'll just have to cast our Spore Burst and pause a turn. And hope to hit one of our other nice domain creatures at some point. We are dead to another Bolt of Keranos, although Bushwhacker doesn't do it anymore. Alright, another Rioters is nice, so maybe I do attack with the first Rioters here. We could wait for another burn spell, although Shock wouldn't do it. We already used 2 Resounding Thunders, so we have 2 Resounding Thunders, 3 Drag Downs left, and another Ground Assault or 2. Do we wait for one of those, or do we attack and offer the trade with a 3-3? I think we want to start attacking here, so it frees up our attacks with the 1-1s as well. Opponent just takes it. So let's play another one. And pause the turn. So I don't know what the opponent's plan is with his ground creatures, but he's not getting through our wall of 1-1s. Our opponent decides to leave, which I don't think he should have, because a Bolt of Keranos still kills us here. Now he drew a drag down, so we get to attack with both Rioters. If our opponent blocks double blocks, then we get to kill the other one in combat. So that's nice. So now our opponent has no creatures left, down to 10 life. And he's not getting through with any ground attackers. Shortcutter doesn't do it. So has to be a Bolt of Keranos here. Instead it's a land. So if we attack with everyone next turn, our opponent's dead. Rafiq is also nice, but not needed. So send in everyone. Opponent blocks a Rioter and takes 11. So yeah, that's gonna do it. I did not think we were gonna win this game after that initial flood, but we managed to top deck a few critical domain cards in a row, and yeah, managed to take the game there. So let's move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opening hand, which has double shock, cultivate and 3 different lands. So I think we'll keep this one. Hope to draw one of our domain cards. Lead with mountain so we can have shock available. So we don't want to draw more lands here, obviously. Otherwise we might get flooded a bit. Opponent leads with a mountain. But no turn 1 play. Alright. Another cultivate is not really what we want either. But I guess it's still better than drawing land, since at least that gets 2 lands out of our deck instead of just 1. Goblin Bushwhacker on turn 2. Now that's aggressive. I think we let this one slide. So our opponent must have more Bushwhackers where that came from. But if he plays something like a Goblin Rebel Master that we want to shock, that's a better target for it. So Wandering Goblins is interesting. I don't think we block a 1/1, because then a shock does kill it. But I do think we play it here. So next turn we get to cultivate and still keep up shock. And the turn after we get to activate him twice, threatening 10 damage. So let's see if the opponent tries to kill him here or just deploys more threats. Alright, so we don't have a choice to block here. Opponent with the Goblin Shortcutter. And hits us for 1 with the Goblin Bushwhacker. So we drop down to 17. And it looks like our opponent might have another 1-drop in hand, but did not play it there. Spore Burst is another nice card here, but I think I cultivate first. The only awkward part about cultivating here is that we don't get to keep up shock, because we do need to grab the plains and the island, unless we want to get those with the second cultivate, but I think we want to cultivate for the plains and the island here so we can cast Spore Burst next turn. Could also attack for 3 here, but I think cultivating is better. So let's go ahead and do that. Plains in play, island in hand, doesn't really matter here. Could also play the forest, but let's just play the island there. Showing our opponent we have the full domain achieved. And let's pause a turn. I don't really want to block here. Again, because of shock. But our opponent's just gonna tap out for a Goblin Rebel Master. Could still go Mountain Shock here, but I think I do want to block the 2/1 here just to prevent some damage, as we will be tapping out for Spore Burst next turn, and our opponent did not have Mountain into Shock, so that's good for us. Here I just like shocking the Rebel Master and playing Spore Burst. And it's gonna be really difficult for the opponent to get past all those 1/1s. Let's see, we can't cultivate, so let's just cast a Spore Burst, play our forest, and pause the turn. So it's not gonna be easy to be able to damage the opponent with the Wandering Goblins once he start keeping his creatures back to block. But at the very least we'll trade with 3 1/1s or a 2/1 and a 1/1. And thanks to drag down we might be able to get more than that. Alright, I think we do attempt an attack here with the Wandering Goblins and see how our opponent reacts. We have both shock and drag down as combat tricks. Our opponent is just gonna let it slide. So we could deal 10 to the opponent here. Problem is we don't get to keep up shock then. Our opponent could play something like Goblin Bushwhacker or Hall of Triumph, which would be bad for us. So I think I'll just bump the Wandering Goblins once, just to be on the safe side. So now we can Cultivate and keep up shock. We can also play Wild Nacatl and keep up shock, or Cultivate and play Wild Nacatl. We can't keep up drag down and shock, which is what I would like to do. I guess playing Cultivate and Wild Nacatl is slightly better, because if our opponent does somehow play Hall of Triumph, then we at least have a 3/3 that can eat a 2/2. So yeah, let's hope our opponent doesn't kill us next turn, and then we should be in good shape. Bushwhacker not great, since the 1 toughness creatures still trade with our 1/1s. Alright, another mountain. So 3, 3, 3. I guess we do play it to keep up drag down, as well as 2 activations. And I think we do attack once again with the Wandering Goblins. I guess we can also attack with Wild Nacatl. We're still at 15, so even if our opponent goes Kranko's Command into Goblin Bushwhacker, we're still not dead. So let's go for an attack like this. See how our opponent blocks. Could easily have his own removal spells. So just a chump on the Wandering Goblins, so let's activate him. Opponent has a shock. Playing it before combat damage was dealt, so let's go ahead and shock the opponent's token. So unless he has a second shock to kill the Wandering Goblins, we will be able to survive. Instead it's a fling, which we can't, I don't think, stop with the drag down. So our opponent's gonna fling the token onto the goblin. So 1 from the fling plus 2 from the shock is going to be enough to kill it here. So we lost a shock, but our opponent lost a token, a shock and a fling, and we still have a drag down left. So I'd say we are in a decent spot, but we do need to draw one of our other domain cards here, I think, to really put this game away. Opponent goes to combat, but I don't think he has any great attacks, unless he has something like Coordinated Assault. No attacks from the opponent, and there's a Resounding Thunder which we can cycle. So let's attack with the Wild Nacatl. See if our opponent blocks again. Block, block. And I do think we actually drag this one down. force the opponent to use another shock on Wild Nacatl. Let's see if he has it end of turn. Does not. So we got rid of 2 of the opponent's creatures. I'm gonna try and hold on to cycle this Resounding Thunder. Our opponent left. Plays Foundry Street Denizen, so gets additional power when he plays red creatures, and there's a Goblin Bushwhacker, which will pump the Denizen, and then... Wait, it wasn't kicked, alright. So the AI, not a fan of kicker, it seems. But otherwise we could have just blocked with our tokens, and our opponent would have lost his entire board. So I guess we attack with the Wild Nacatl. If the opponent triple blocks, we can cycle Resounding Thunder on a 1/1. If he chumps, that's fine. If he quad blocks, then that wouldn't work. But he triple blocks, so we can try and get him here. Cycling, because that draws a card. I guess we kill a Bushwhacker. We draw a card from cycling, and it's another Resounding Thunder, which is nice, and we managed to kill the 2 1/1s, so we can finally start attacking with our own 1/1s. Opponent 1 card left in hand. So let's see if we attack with everyone. Opponent blocks the Wild Nacatl, takes 5, drops down to 7, so 1 point short. So I guess if he doesn't block the Wild Nacatl, then he's dead. And their opponent is still at 12, but still decides to chump. So let's just play another Wild Nacatl, I guess. Maybe I should have Resounding Thundered, looking for maybe another shock which could win on the spot. But we already used 2 of them, and I don't think there's a way our opponent can turn this around. Also should have played a Cultivate there to increase our, to improve our draws, but that's not gonna matter here. And there's a shock I would have drawn if I played the Resounding Thunder last turn. Let's just cast a shock on the opponent. Oh, that's a player to save some time. And that's gonna do it. So another victory against Mono Red. So apparently it's a decent matchup. I guess those 1/1 tokens really help. And then we're able to win the game with our big domain creatures. So let's move on to one final game. Alright, let's take a look at our opening hand. And this is sort of the hand you have to get used to. Not great with only 1 land, but we do have Amulet plus Cultivate, so I think this is keepable. A second land makes this hand obviously a lot better, because then we're assured to cast Cultivate on time. Right now we might be in trouble if we don't draw a land in the next 2 turns. So probably just gonna get a red source with the Amulet. Playing against Azorius Guildgate. So yeah, let's activate the Amulet, get a red source. So we can play it, keep up shock, and hope to hit a 3rd land. Not much else we can do. Let's see what the opponent's up to. A red-white Guildgate, and passes the turn. And there's a land, and it's a swamp. Perfect. So let's see. I think this is another situation where casting the Rioters into Cultivate might be better than casting Cultivate first. We could cast Cultivate and then cast 2 Spore Bursts in a row, but I think deploying the Rioters here is fine, since there's not a ton of removal spells that get this at this point. Shock doesn't kill it. Our opponent could go Mountain, Bolt of Keranos, but not enough people play that card. I guess our opponent could bounce this, but that's still fine for us. So passes a turn. And this is another interesting scenario where we could cast Cultivate, but then maybe risk losing the Rioters to a Reprisal, which kills a creature with power 4 or greater. But I think I still go for it here. Hope this doesn't get countered, it does not. And let's grab our planes, here it is. Maybe pretend we have a God's Willing, I don't know. And attack for 5. See if this works. And it does, so that's great. Pause a turn, maybe opponent has a think twice, does not. No play on turn 3 for the opponent, which is good for us. There's a forest, which I did not see coming. So opponent playing a 4-color deck at least, and Cultivate will show us if our opponent's on 5 colors or just 4. And there's a swamp, so our opponent is playing a 5-color deck with Guild Gates rather than Tri-lands, which can't possibly be right. So here, let's see. Opponent does have double white, so could easily have planes into planar cleansing, but we're only committing 1 additional card, so I think that's fine. So let's attack for 5. And put another 5 power in play. Keeping up Shock. And we do play the mountain here. And pause the turn. I guess we could have tapped differently to represent more cards. But I don't think our opponent is in a situation where he can really play around anything. Since he's on 10 life and we have 10 power in play. There's Inferno Titan, which will do a pretty good job at stabilizing this board. Probably kills 3 tokens. So let's see, we have 6, 7... We have 4, 5, 6 lands in play. So can't quite cycle the Resounding Thunder yet. So we could attack and then offer the trade by shocking the Inferno Titan afterwards, which I think is fine if we can follow it up with another Spore Burst. So yeah, we can't cycle the Resounding Thunder quite yet, we would need 1 more land, and then it would be able to take down the Inferno Titan. But I think we just attack with everyone here. And if the opponent does not block, he's just dead to burn spells. Opponent does block. So let's go ahead and shock at the Inferno Titan. And I think just play another Spore Burst, since that's more difficult to answer than a Wandering Goblins. And both die to Anger of the Gods. Opponent could have Planar Cleansing, but they both tie to that as well. And I think a bunch of 1/1s are more difficult to answer than a Wandering Goblins. So let's see what the opponent has here. Still has 7 cards in hand, 6 now. Could maybe gain life with an Archangel. Instead it's a Treasured Find. Getting back Inferno Titan is my guess. Instead it's Cultivate. But no green mana. I am not sure what our opponent could have here, but I guess we'll find out. Attack with everyone. Deal 7. We did draw our 8th land, so we get to cycle. Our opponent can't counter cycling, but our opponent could have instant speed life gain. There's not a ton of it, but I guess we just go for it here. So can't be countered, and there we go. I wanna thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay as much as I did, and as always, have a nice day.